Sixers fans were cheering last night. They weren't cheering so much over the weekend with a loss to Atlanta and the Orlando Magic. But, Michael, I'm sure you and I have known each other long enough now that you know that I probably wasn't all that concerned about those two losses to Atlanta and Orlando. It's a long season, and they're kind of are where they are. I was frustrated, but not concerned. And I think you saw why last night. They wiped the Nets up last night. So were you concerned when you saw them play against Atlanta or Orlando at all?
No, honestly, not at all, Mike. I mean, they were coming off a 6-game winning streak that included wins over three other top teams in the East. All pretty convincing. They played great against that Bucks game on the 2 Sundays ago. They played really well to win that game against Boston last Wednesday. They handled the Pacers, the week before that. And like you said, it's a long season. It's I think a lot of people act almost like it's the Eagles season. Where it's 16 games and every game the outcome could really dictate things in the playoffs. I think it's important to remember that, like you said, these things happen. I saw you compared it to the same thing with, the Warriors got smoked at home by the Mavericks last weekend. And, obviously the Warriors have a little bit more, people in the responses were saying they have a little bit more leeway, obviously, as a team that's won, 3 titles in 4 years, and the Sixers haven't won anything. But the truth of the matter is it does happen over the course of the season. And I think you saw last night the Sixers, not that it was a must-win game, necessarily, but it was a game that I think the Sixers felt like they needed to have just to kind of, calm the waters and get back on track, and especially kind of send a message to a team that they could potentially be facing in the playoffs to show them that, we can handle this team. And I think you saw that when they needed to take care of business, they did.
Yeah, and they did it in convincing fashion. I mean, they got out of the gates. They stuck on a team that they had struggled with. And I think you're right. I mean, it was almost like, look, we're at the end of a 6-game winning streak. We're on the road. They played on a Saturday night in Atlanta, a place that doesn't have a lot of juice, against a team that, is young and kind of playing with a lot of energy. The Magic are fighting for a playoff spot. I think the Sixers their energy just wasn't there. And I think last night, I said yesterday, if you're going to bet anybody, bet the Sixers. They're going to blow the Nets out because they want everybody to know, hey, when we want to flip the switch, we can do it. Now, the reason I think that's interesting is because last year, when Cleveland was going through the season, their defense was horrible, right? Their defense was horrendous, and people were saying, maybe their defense is so bad that they just can't do it. That was the regular season, and then the Cavaliers cleaned things up in the playoffs. Do the Sixers have the look of a team that can just flip the switch?
I think the Sixers are a unique situation, Mike, because I don't know that it's necessarily a flip that they can switch, a switch that they can flip, but I think it's that they have the benefit of that they're continuing to gel, moving forward as a unit into the postseason. And I think there's a real chance that, as we've seen, they're 8-2 so far when they have all 5 of their guys in the starting 5. Obviously, it's still a small sample size, but I think you've seen them all grow more comfortable in their roles. Jimmy, obviously, is kind of the closer and, ball handler, secondary ball handler. Joel has been, teams especially determined to just get position in the post and not settle. Except for last night, he obviously felt like he was going to be on fire from the three-point line. But in general, he's been doing a great job of, getting post position and just using his size to bully people. Tobias himself has been in a little bit of, a shooting slump recently, but he still seems to fit, really seamlessly into the whole equation on the offensive end. And I think the Sixers have a chance to continue to gel, whereas, a lot of the other teams in the East, the Celtics, the Pacers, even the Raptors by now, they added Marcus Gasol, but with Kawhi, he's been there for a while. These teams are kind of what they are, where I feel like the Sixers still are kind of learning about each other and continuing to build. So, in a month from now, 3 weeks from now, there's a chance that they could be playing even better basketball than they're playing now, or have been over the past few weeks, and that's a great potential for them to have.
Yeah, and I think there's a fine line here because they are trying to gel and they are trying to get, everything together, but you also see teams resting and trying to get ready for the playoffs. So I think Brett's got a fine line that he's trying to dance on here of gelling guys and yet resting them at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. That's kind of the only disadvantages because, like you said, Mike, this is a time where a lot of teams that are pretty solidified in terms of their playoff standing, like the Sixers are, would be given, a night off here and there to a starter. Ben would get some rest. Joel obviously would get some rest. But at the same time, like you said, the Sixers still want to kind of have these guys out on the floor to continue to build that chemistry. So I think it is kind of a fine line that Brett's walking right now. At the end of the day, I think the organizational credo has always been, err on the side of caution being rest in this case. So I do think coming down the stretch of these last, few couple weeks of the regular season, we will see, Joel probably get at least one more game off. Ben will probably get a game off. Tobias, who I don't think has missed a game since he's been in Philly, will probably get maybe a game off. Same with Jimmy. And they'll try to fit in the chemistry, from there. And then hopefully once the first round rolls around, they'll have an opportunity to, face a team that they, not to overlook by any means, but a team that they could use some of those games to continue to build that chemistry when all the guys are healthy.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain covers the Sixers at The Real Mike KB on Twitter. The Sixers take on Minnesota tomorrow. I know a lot of people might say, good riddance, Billy Lang. He runs the defense, and people are very frustrated with the defense this whole season. Number one, let me ask you this. Is the frustration with the defense just?
Yeah, I think to an extent, Mike. I mean, it's definitely taken a step backwards from what it was last season. I think we saw a team that was one of the best teams defensively in the entire league last year, and they were really able to, kind of rely on that in certain situations. And I think it's definitely taken a step backwards this season. Now, if that's all, that can all fall on the feet of Billy Lang is another story. Obviously, losing Lloyd Pierce, as everyone likes to point out, was huge. And then, personally, I think, I think that the roster overturn had a lot to do with it. Because so much of the defense of an NBA team is built on, chemistry, repetition, and familiarity. And the Sixers really just didn't get a chance to build that throughout the course of the season due to the trades. I do think that really had an impact. Just guys knowing where someone else was going to be, knowing preferences and how the, switches, things like that. It just takes timing and communication that gets built. I think that probably played a big part in it too. So, I mean, I do think it's fair to be, a little bit discouraged with the defense this season, but how much of that is solely Billy Lang's fault? That's another conversation.
So I find it interesting. Jim O'Brien, who many people might not even know is still around. He was once the Sixers coach. He was supposed to be the savior a couple of years. I say a couple of years ago. It was about 10 years ago now. Did not fare very well when he returned to Philly to be the head coach here after a stint in Boston. And he has been with the team as an advisor. He will now jump back on the bench and run the defense. Is that a plus, a minus? Interesting. How do you read that whole situation?
Mike, I'd honestly be lying to you if I told you I know what to expect defensively from Jim. I mean, obviously he's a guy that's been around the organization, knows it. I would expect him to follow, at least in the short term, a lot of the same principles that, were instilled by Billy and Brett that have been in place. But, like you said, he didn't fare very well as the head coach when he was here, earlier in the time. So it's to me, it's kind of a question mark. I really don't know what to expect. Obviously, a lot of people were not sad to see Billy Lang go. But like I said, I don't know how just that was. So I think it's definitely going to be an adjustment and something, for at least me personally, I'll be very interested to see, what types of tweaks or what the approach will be, from under Jim moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I don't recall Jim O'Brien being some defensive mastermind, specifically in his tenure as the head. Did he get fired in 1 year?
Maybe a little bit longer, but he certainly didn't last.
I think he only lasted the year here. It might have been a little bit longer, but I thought it was just a one-and-done situation for Jim O'Brien. But I'm very intrigued to see, because I thought last night defensively, now Lang was there last night, so I'm not suggesting, wow, they changed things up. I thought they looked a lot better defensively last night.
Yeah, I thought they did too, Mike, but it was hard to tell, whether that was the result of kind of just increased intensity, which I do think is the issue in some of these situations, especially a game like the past two that they lost where, maybe the focus just wasn't there and it wasn't necessarily a matter of X's and O's, which is something you and I have talked about, before, that some of the time it's not always coaching. That's something kind of an easy scapegoat to point out, but, sometimes the result is just a matter of players not buying in or as fully as they should. And I think last night the Sixers just, like we were talking about, I think they wanted to send a message and get a win, and I think they looked really locked in. And when they're locked in, they have the potential to be one of the best defensive teams in the league. I think you saw that last night.
Well, and that's what I want to ask you is, okay, many people are disenchanted with the defense, which is what I started with. Is that just? So do they have the pieces to be a good defensive team? Because one area where they struggle is guards who cut. Now, I think Brett Brown went out of his way last night to let everybody know we're number one in the league defending the three, right? So there's a fine line of, okay, you're the best at defending the three, but is that hurting you in another area? And it seems that, well, they get beat a lot by guards. So do they have the personnel to really, I don't want to say flip the switch, but to be a good defensive team all around?
Yeah, I think they do, Mike. I think that'll come, consistency is a big thing there. Like, I think we see them show signs of it sometimes, and then other times just not show that. I think when that rotation gets a little bit shortened into the postseason, and you're looking at 7 guys, 8 guys maybe, I think they do have the potential. I mean, Joel is obviously one of the best defensive players in the league, and it's a luxury of an anchor to have back there that can really, turn a game defensively. I think Jimmy obviously is still one of the better defenders in the league, and Tobias and Ben are, both really switchable, long guys that are pretty laterally quick too. JJ obviously being the odd man out there, but I do think that they have the talent to be, not necessarily the best defensive team in the league, but, combined with the offensive firepower that they have, the ability to score, I do think that they could be, good enough defensively in the postseason to make a legitimate run.
By the way, OBrien, 4 years in Boston, 4 in Indiana, 1 and done in Philadelphia. So
there we go.
Yeah, I had read somewhere that, he wanted to get off the bench. He wanted to kind of get off the night-to-night travel and all that stuff. So he kind of watches the game from some film room behind the locker room back there. And as an advisor, he comes in at halftime, talks to the team a little bit, adds a little input. But now he will be out on the bench, so they will have and this is odd at this stage of the season. Like, Lloyd Pierce got hired to be the Hawks coach in the middle of the playoffs last year, but he didn't have to leave to start coaching the Hawks, whereas Lang, he's got to go and start recruiting and everything. So this is kind of, I don't know how many times you see this really happen where a head coach or a assistant coach leaves right in the middle of a playoff run. And you might not like Lang and the defense, but that is an adjustment period for this team.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And I was honestly thinking the exact same thing when, the news was officially announced. At first, I was thinking that it would follow the same path as the NBA where, you finish out the season. And then once I read and realized, like you said, he had to leave to do recruiting. I can't really recall, especially at least not with the Sixers. You usually don't lose an assistant in the middle of a playoff and potential championship run. And no matter what, I mean, it's going to be just another adjustment that the team has to, kind of overcome or to make throughout what has already been a season of adjustments. So, maybe it won't change that much under Jim. Like I said, I think he'll probably, it's too late to really install a new system or too much of a new scheme. There could be small tweaks here and there that we should keep an eye out for. But by and large, I think it'll just have to be a matter of the players stepping up and, making more of an effort, which I think they will come the playoffs anyway.
Joel Embiid last night. He was maybe at his best. Hit a couple of threes. He had 14 points early on. I mean, I don't think he played all that well over the weekend in Atlanta and Monday night in Orlando. He wasn't awful, but that guy last night wasn't the guy I saw in those 2 games. If that guy last night plays in the playoffs, this team's in the finals, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I felt the same way about the game against Milwaukee where Giannis dropped 50, but Joel had, 40 and 17, and the Sixers won. And he just had it, he had the look of determination that he was just going to dominate, use his size to his advantage, things that people wanted to see him do more consistently earlier in his career, on a fast break, just getting right down to the charge circle, getting position right there and just, overpowering guys down there. I think we saw that determination. And when you get that from, night in, night out from Joel, there's literally no one single-handedly that could stop him in the league. And it gives the Sixers, a great kind of advantage over any other team in the East. And it's just a matter of, not that he can't necessarily bring that every night, but it's just a matter of the production being there, other things falling into place. And if he, like you said, if he's able to bring that, it takes the Sixers to an entire another level.
What is your assessment right now of Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris's roles on this team? Are they becoming defined? Are they still up in the air? Would you like to see them tweaked or different?
I think at this point, Mike, they're pretty defined. I think Jimmy's was obviously, it took a little bit of labor to kind of get to a point where he was comfortable in his role in the offense. But I think we've really kind of seen it over the past 3 weeks to transform to the point where it's pretty clear cut. You know what to expect from Jimmy. He kind of picks his spots, does things defensively, sets the table a lot throughout the first half of a game, and then really kind of steps up and embraces that closer role in the third, or especially the fourth quarter when they need it. And I think Brett's done a pretty good job of incorporating him with the ball in his hands a little bit more, and in turn moving Ben, off the ball a little bit before the playoffs. So that's something that he'll have, a little bit of comfort and experience with when the playoffs come around and teams, try to back off of Ben and force him to, shoot. You can kind of counteract that by having the ball in Jimmy's hands on the perimeter and dumping Ben down into a post position. So I think that situation with Jimmy's gotten to a point where, at least for now, I think it's the best that it's going to be. He seems, he seems generally like happy in the locker room after games they've been winning. He's obviously been playing a big role in that on both ends of the floor. And Tobias is a guy that's, who, if he's genuine in what he says, but he seems like a guy that's really just come in and morphed and fit the Sixers, perfectly. And he seems like a team first type of guy. He could obviously probably demand or take more shots in a different situation, but I think he understands that, the level of talent around him allows him to be a facilitator. You saw him make a couple nice drives and passes last night. One specifically, he had a nice drop off to Shake Milton for a dunk in the lane. So I think that, it's not perfect given the short amount of time. The starters have all only played 10 games together, so it's not like they have, an off season, a training camp and all that. But given the short amount of time, I think that they're both pretty comfortable where they are on the floor, which is, obviously a good thing with the playoffs just a couple weeks away.
They played Brooklyn last night. I think Brooklyn's in some trouble there, brother. They might not even make the playoffs the way their schedule lines up now. I mean, that loss was a crippling loss for them. Some people were actually afraid of them. If you look at a matchup between Philly, Detroit, Philly, Brooklyn, Philly, Orlando, Philly, Miami, are you concerned with any of them?
No, concerned, it's not the word I would use. There's obviously, I think Detroit would probably be the best matchup. The Sixers really just, own them. Their strengths can be neutralized pretty well. Detroit or Brooklyn, obviously we saw what they could do last night. They're all about the same. I think that the Sixers could be given a little bit of trouble by any of those teams, but when they're motivated like we saw last night, and they know come playoff time, and it's not a game that they can overlook, I don't think any of those teams would be a team that would legitimately challenge the Sixers. Maybe they would get 1-2 tops if they stole one on the road. But, I don't think the Sixers would be, necessarily especially challenged by any of those teams.
Michael, they've got Minnesota coming up. They've got a couple of other games where they're on the road against teams that aren't all that good. Any concern, letdown spots? There's some talk about, you got to be playing your best ball. I saw an article the other day that this momentum is a myth, just get to the playoffs rested and healthy. What do you want to see over these final 7? Because, Ben Simmons said last night, all of them, they're all important. And Brett kind of inferred that, these last 7, we want to learn some stuff. What do you want to learn over the last 7?
Yeah, Mike, that's a great point. It's a combination of things. Obviously, you certainly don't want to go into the playoffs that hasn't lost a couple, games that you should have won. So I do think it's important for them to take care of business. Like we kind of said before, I know organizationally rest will be really important. Embiid missed the whole 10 games of the regular season and the first couple of games of the playoffs last year before he came back. Obviously, just having him healthy is an advantage this year that they didn't have last year going into the playoffs, and I think that's something obviously they'll want to preserve. So, I mean, in terms of exact number of wins and losses, I don't think that's as important as, a combination of, like we were talking about earlier, combining getting the guys so they're feeling rested and healthy and, as fresh as they can be going into the postseason, while also maintaining, solid play and momentum and wins, which I don't think should be difficult overall, closing out the season against some of these teams that they have. So, I think the main thing is really kind of just keeping the momentum going that they've built, and then, finding rest for the guys that need it when they can.
I know it's interesting. We're getting down to the wire here. Rotation, you wrote about the bench the other day. What do we, how do you see these rotations as we get down? You wrote about the bench is still really failing them. Is that something that can be fixed between now and the end, or are we just going to bank on, hey, you don't see the bench all that much in the playoffs and the rotations are shorter?
Yeah, I think that really works in the Sixers' favor this year, Mike, the fact that they'll be able to, cut that rotation down. Starters will play more minutes, and when you have, 5 starters as good as the Sixers, Brett should be able to, have the rotation down to a point where you have at least, 2, maybe even 3 of the, the starting 5 on the floor at all times, which would really minimize, the time the entire bench unit is out there. And, last night, obviously, I thought the bench really played well. Mike Scott was hitting his threes. Boban was looking, probably as good as he's looked since, he's been in the Sixers. He was really able to kind of be a mismatch. No one on Brooklyn could guard him. He was even taking it out to the perimeter and knocking down, another 3. TJ hit a couple of shots late. So, I mean, when the Sixers are getting production like that, it can be a boost. The main issue is it's inconsistent, the production they'll get. A game you'll get it like that, but then there was a stretch of games where no one on the bench was scoring outside of James Ennis. I think there's 2 straight games where he was the only player that scored from the bench. So, that's the issue, that there's just not consistency coming off of that second unit. But the fact that, that'll be minimized will certainly work in the Sixers' favor. But ultimately, they're going to need some of these guys to step up. And you hope that they can deliver, in terms of Mike Scott or Boban and TJ, that they can step up and deliver, performances more like they did last night as opposed to the ones where they're, kind of notions.
Yeah, it seems that Mike Scott is kind of their guy, right? He's like the guy off the bench. He's their sixth man, if you will.
Yeah, I think his versatility is a big reason why he was kind of able to move up into that spot. Brett can play him at the 3. He can play him at the 4. He's even used him, as a small ball 5 in certain situations. And, he's a close to 40% shooter from long distance. He's definitely streaky, which is the issue. Some games he'll just be off and go over. But in general, when he's on, he's on like you saw last night. So I think that his skill set and just his versatility gives Brett something to use off the bench. It's kind of like his Swiss Army knife, I guess.
Yeah, 3 for 3 from 3 last night. Efficient, 4 of 7, 11 points for Mike Scott in 28 minutes. Boban, of course, had a big game. He's always very efficient. In fact, one of the most efficient players in NBA history. Shake gave him a little bit of a run last night. 17 minutes, scored 4. No Bolden, no Jonathan Simmons, and Zaire Smith obviously doesn't seem like he's going to be in the rotation much at all. So we'll see how Brett tweaks this down the stretch they come. Minnesota tomorrow night. And, of course, the playoffs begin April 14th is when it all begins. So we're just 2 weeks away from the start of the NBA playoffs. We will be all over them, and you can hear the Sixers playoffs right here on 97.3 ESPN. And, of course, Michael Kaskey-Blomain. Follow him at The Real Mike KB on Twitter. And we'll have plenty more Sixers right here on the Sports Bash. Thanks, pal.
Thanks, Mike. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, man. Sixers coverage with Michael Kaskey-Blomain. Like all guests appear via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.